1-hour walking tour. It's more talk than walk. And there's a fee for it. And I guess you know that. It's €9 per year. 4 for students, no charge for kids under 12. And pay at the end. I trust you. And I got this. My name is Georg, not Watchman here. And first of all, I want to give you an idea about the duties that Watchmen had back in the old days. Their main job was, they were out in the streets like police, taking care of the city when all the others were sleeping. And sure, that was dangerous, because all the good people were at home. Those who were still out in the streets were the drunken folks and thieves, maybe even enemies. That's why it was dangerous. And that watchman had to carry this kind of weapon. It's called a hellbar. One can do a lot of things with it. And I guess this part needs no explanation. The axe part. And the spear is pretty clear. But also this hook was important. Because when you were fighting against the guy who was on a horse, and you were just on foot with that thing, it didn't look too good. You had to get him down. So once you got the hook in his clothes or armor, and you could pull the guy from the horse, and he was laying on the ground, things looked much better. And also this little hooks here makes sense. It's not just design. Because when the guy on the horse got a sword, and he hit down heavy on the other guy on the ground, and the sword got stuck in here, it could be turned off the head of the other person. So like I said, multiple uses for this kind of weapon. And there were 6 of us, 6 night watchmen in Rothenburg. Each had to guard his own district all night long, which was kind of hard in the winter, because then the shift was from 8 in the evening until 5 in the morning, out all night in the cold, with bad shoes and bad clothes. Not easy. And also salary was poor, but the city paid was not enough for a bigger pay. But people used to have a lot of kids back in those days. They considered it their life insurance when they got old. And it kind of worked, but these guys had to work some extra hours during the daytime instead of recovering from a night shift. Wasn't easy. What they also did, that's why they got the horn, was to give a loud signal when there was a fire at night. Do you want to hear it? Yeah. But do you see any fire? Yeah. Like this. Loud enough to make everybody wake up. And all the people who heard the signal ran out of their houses, trying to fight the fire as quick as possible. It was the biggest fear people had. Nothing worse could ever happen to a city in the old days but a fire in night. It was surely good to know somebody's out there, like watchmen's on duty. His quick alarm could save people's lives, could save the whole city. That sounds like it was an important profession, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it's true. It was important. But at the same time, it was considered a low profession, because people were superstitious. Back in the old days, they feared the night and the darkness. People believed in all kinds of spooky things going on at night. And that a poisonous fog could bring diseases into town at night. And that watchman was with all this, with the dark element and the scary stuff. And that's why it was considered a low profession. I know it's not logical for us now, but it was for people back then. For them, that all made sense. By the way, guess who were the two lowest professions? Who was on the very bottom of the social scale? It was the hangman, the executioner. He was the lowest in everything. And the second lowest was the gravedigger. And they liked to work together, these two. They had the same clients. The third lowest was already me, that watchman and tower guards. And not to forget two of them. They were also lamplighters. They lightened street lamps in the evening when it went down. And they had to check if the doors of their houses were all locked. And they had to check out the places where the young lovers used to hide it and disturb them and chase them away. Not sure if they did that. Maybe that was the right moment to get an extra coin and just ignore. I could imagine. And we had them here until 1920. Quite a long time. The real watchman existed in Rothenburg. And the police took over. Doesn't mean I'm not real. It's my main job. For a long time. I mean decades. And everything's better now, I admit. Work time is much less. Not all night. And pay is better too. And it's not dangerous at all like it once was, because you all come with me now. So I feel pretty safe too. With all of you people. And after this intro, it's time to leave. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Good. Well, this wasn't a long walk. But when you look back where we started, you can see how the market square is surrounded by a lot of big houses. Some of them are from the 14th century. The huge building right opposite, on the other side of the street, it's our town hall. An impressive building. And have you seen St. Jacob's Church by chance? It's more a cathedral than a church, at least by some. All this talk means this was a rich city, and all the buildings that are mentioned still show the wealth Rothenburg once had. And there were three reasons why this was a rich place. Our main economy was our territory. There were 400 square kilometers of fertile land, 180 villages on this land. This all belonged to Rothenburg City, a wide territory with all kinds of food and thousands of sheep. So we got tons of wool. Every third of our craftsmen, after bakers and butchers, was working in this kind of business. We were famous for our textile products. Reason number two were two important trade routes, and Rothenburg was right next to them. One was coming from Prague to Paris, east-west, and the other one from Scandinavia down to Rome, Italy. Nowadays, that's the Autobahn A6 and A7. Intersection about 20 miles west from here. But back in the old days, when they got the trade routes, this intersection was just 300 yards outside of our main gate. And sure, that was perfect, because a lot of merchants, pilgrims, travelers, being that close, dropped in here, spending time and money in our city. Like now. You do.
Yeah.
And not to forget the third reason, Rothenburg had a special status. It was a free imperial city, which was the highest privilege a city could ever get. We got it in 1274 by King Rudolf of Habsburg. And we lost it again in 1802 when we became part of Bavaria. That was a sad moment because we lost our liberty and our identity. Now we were part of a county. But for more than 500 years, Rothenburg was a state in a state with its own city government. No count, no bishop. Just the king himself was above Rome. But you know, the empire was huge, almost half of Europe big. And the king was somewhere out there. He had no time to check us out. So we could do our own thing without being controlled by nobody, which was a huge plus. And for all these reasons, Rothenburg became an important place. There were 6,000 inhabitants in the 15th century. At this time, this was one of the 20 biggest cities in the Holy Roman Empire of German nation. And we had a time of glory from 15th to 17th century. But then everything stopped. And this city fell asleep for 250 years. Time stood still. Nothing happened anymore. There was just poverty. Things were very extreme. In our history, it really went up and down. But I'll tell you later about the town. It's too early for the sad stuff. Now, we are here in the main street of Rothenburg. This is the widest lane in town. When you look back, you can see it. Lots of big houses right and left. The rich and noble people like to live here, in that street and around the market square. And the biggest privately owned building in the whole city, it's right opposite. And there's something special. Next to the entrance, there are these chains with a handle. It's with a doorbell. Like people used to have them long ago. If one pulls there, the bell's inside ring. But not anymore. Because everybody tries. And the people who live there, they don't like them. They fix them. Interesting detail is, those who own the house and live inside are descendants of the noble family, which moved in more than 300 years ago, in 1697. And they're still in there. Not the same people, but the same family, which is amazing. A city in the old days was like a big village. Sure, it didn't look like one. It was much bigger, walled, and fortified. But it smelled like it. And even worse, because there was a tannery and a skinnery in town. The stench coming from there was really horrible. And the streets were out of dirt, no cobblestones. The animals were in the streets in the daytime. Thousands of poultry, but also goats and pigs doing their part. Everywhere. And the people were throwing it out of the window. Everything. In the early morning, it was kind of dangerous. Because after people got up, they emptied their chamber pots through the window into the street. And they were told to give a short warning before. So they were kind of prepared. But seconds later it happened. And it's kind of tricky too. Because when somebody shouts down, people in the street look up. And it was all in the streets, all that dirt and crap. Just one idea to get rid of it. They used to have a gutter in the street. Twice a week, everyone had to sweep the dirt laying in front of his house into that gutter. Then they hoped for next rain to come and wash it downhill in the moat or in the valley. But that was more a hope than a good idea. It didn't really work. In July, August, when it was hot and dry, nothing went downhill. But it stank so hard that all the rich people who could afford having a solid house on the countryside went out of town. And because of all the dirt in the streets and the stored food in the houses, and you have to know, each family had to store grain for a year to last, to be ready for a siege or a bad harvest. So there was a lot of grain in the attics and a lot of dirt in the streets. And that was most attractive for who?
Rats.
Rats. Mice too. But what happened because of the rats?
Plague.
Bubonic plague.
Yeah.
It was a special kind of flea living on rats. The flea got this bacteria, killing all these millions of people. And it had started far from here, in China.
Yeah.
Making its way over the Silk Road down to Russia. And when they were loading up ships in Crimea with goods from the Silk Road, determined to go to Italy, these rats went on board as well. That's what rats are doing.
Yeah.
And a lot of these ships never arrived because the whole crew died on the way. But a few made it into an Italian harbor. And those who were still alive got from board. And the rats did too. And there it was.
Venice.
That's how the plague came to Europe, on the ships of the merchants. Between 1347 and 1352, that was when the first wave of plague came over Europe. It took at least a third of Europe's population. About 25 million people died.
Yeah.
Average mortality in cities was 40%. The peak on that list was Florence in Italy with 80%. Some areas were almost wiped out of people, and other areas not so much. And the hardest part was, more than 90% of those who got the plague and died got no last rites, because there was no priest showing up. Not because they refused to go, or they were too scared. It was vice versa. They were amongst the first victims because they were. But it was contagious. And imagine how close a priest can get to a person that's dying. Maybe just able to whisper his last words into the priest's ear. Real close. And there weren't that many priests in the city. Pretty soon they were all gone. That meant for all the rest, nobody's there and they don't. No support from the church, no lesson. And that meant going where? Hell. Direct. For eternity. And that was the real drama about this disease. To die knowing hell is next. This dimension of fear that these people had, we cannot imagine. Rational as we are nowadays about this kind of things. More or less. Besides plague, there were other diseases. Lots of wars and hunger. People could die from simple infections. Life expectancy was low. Childhood mortality high. And so I could continue. But I don't want to make everything negative. There might have been also some positive aspects of life. But I don't know it. So my conclusion is, and I think you agree, there were no good old days. And one last detail. You know, when people got the plague, the first symptom they were showing was they started sneezing. So when you people say, God bless you, when somebody sneezes, that comes from the time of the plague. When sneezing could mean, ooh, this person's gonna die, spinal death. That's the real background of that phrase.
Don't say, yeah.
It's
don't
from
say.
the Plato.
Yeah.
Really? Now, before we walk through this gate, I want to tell you something about it. It's one of the 6 gates of Rothenburg, and it was the safest one. No enemy tried to get up there. There's just a park and a cliff coming. We'll see that pretty soon once we get outside. And there's something else special. Once we walk in, you will see, in the first big wooden door coming up, is a small door cut into, working independent of the big one. They called it a manhole. Because when the gatekeepers opened it, the hole was just big enough for one man to fit through. That's why manhole. It was in every city on every gate, always for the same use. It was for residents who made a certain kind of mistake. Guess which? Late. That's right. Out too late, missing curfew. It was last chance for latecomers getting in. You know, it was too dangerous to open a big gate at night.
Yeah.
Why should a whole city get in danger for a latecomer? The danger was, an enemy could have tried to get in the same moment. And it didn't need a lot of enemy to destroy a city. A few of them were enough. The only thing they had to do was to
Burn.
burn it down, start a fire, or even better, several fires on different spots. If that happened, that was it. City was lost. There was a permanent threat. People had to think about security all the time. And sure they did. Every evening with beginning of darkness, that means different in the seasons, all the bells were rung from all the clock towers to inform everyone who was still outside to get back in. The bells informed the people when it was time to hurry home. They had an hour to make it. If they missed it, they had a problem. Because all the big gates were shut. Last chance manhole, but expensive to use it. The gatekeepers asked for a fine.
Good.
Because without a fine, everybody would have been late.
Yeah.
Every 5 minutes, people would have knocked at that door all night through. But once it's expensive, it's different.
Budget for
The fine educated people to be home in time next time. And that was the long story of the small manhole. Now let's go and have a look at it.
manhole.
And now look over there. Isn't that a fantastic view? There's the southern end of when you look this direction, you can see we're on the edge of the cliff. If you can't see it, just
Bridge.
it's going straight downhill, about 60 meters, into the Tauber Valley. Tauber is the name of the cliff. And we have this cliff on 3 sides around us. No enemy tried to get up. And by the way, it didn't look like now. Now it's like a jungle. Everything grows wild, bushes and trees. In the old days, the whole cliff was a vineyard. For two reasons. Vineyards are easy to guard. Because they are structured. You cannot hide in the vineyard. And the other reason was wine. People needed a lot of wine. Because they could not drink any water.
Yeah.
Water was full of bacteria. You could ruin your health. You could even die drinking water. But everything that was fermented, that was alcohol, beer, cider, wine, was free from bacteria and safe to drink. And everybody did that on a permanent basis.
Even kids.
But it was way less alcohol. Only half what we know nowadays. But you know, once you get enough stuff, you still get in the mood. And even the kids got it because it was safe.
Yeah.
So growing up children back then was so much easier.
Fun too.
It was quiet. No discussion. No shouting. Perfect. I envy them. What we do now is so crazy compared to what they did. But times are changing. Back to security. We had 3 sites saved, which was pretty perfect because we could concentrate almost all our manpower on just one side where the attack happened. And that's over there, on the other end. There we built a high wall to protect us. And you must have seen it because you came in there. You must have seen the wall. And did you walk the wall? If not, don't miss doing it. It's so exciting and special. There is a handful of cities all over Europe offering that kind of thing. And it's open night and day, free of charge. Imagine that. And back in the old days, the citizens were standing there on a high position, shooting down on all this enemy. Our main enemy were the neighbor cities, the Bishop of Würzburg and the Count of Nuremberg, to mention just the worst two, because they tried it so often, but they never made it. Not the two I mentioned, and not all the other enemy we had. This city wasn't taken until the 30 Years' War, which lasted from 1618 to 1648. And the one who did it was
Tilly.
General Tilly, leader of the Imperial Catholic Army. So you have to know, it was a religious war. And Rothenburg was Protestant. And there was this huge Catholic army of 40,000 men outside of Rothenburg end of October 1631, when they ran into a problem. And the problem was, it was raining for a whole week. And you can maybe imagine what kind of streets people got. Back in those days, it was all mud. And these troops got hundreds of carriages, wagons, cannons. They made no miles anymore. They got stuck in the dirt running out of food. Everybody was hungry and freezing, because after the rain it got cold. So there was a huge army in a desolate situation. They had to have a winter quarter, a dry spot, enough to eat, urgently. And the general picked us, Rothenburg, sending a mounted messenger to inform us that this is going to happen, that they are on their way to us, and we should be ready when they arrive. Have everything organized for them. Open the gates, let them in, and supply them for the winter. This was a bad news. We were 6,000 people, men, women, children, and 40,000 wanted to get going. And they were not nice guests, not soldiers, but mercenaries. The only thing they wanted was plunder and steal. Take our wives and daughters, our money and possession, our storage, our food, everything. And we should let them in. And let them do all this without fighting?
No.
No way. These were brave people. And the town fathers of Rothenburg decided that it's better to stand up and fight and hold the city. Everybody who was able to carry a weapon was called on the walls and towers. And then they were showing up. 40,000. Must have been impressive and really scary. And I have to tell you, the whole thing did not work. There were too many of them. And once they realized that we won't let them in, they were shooting from a distance against our walls with their big cannons. We answered the fire as good as we could. But then they hit the powder tower, which was a tower on the wall, right where the attack was. Because there we needed all the gunpowder. But it was all in one tower. After it blew up, we found out it's not smart. But too late. Heavy explosion.
Yeah.
A gap in the wall where the tower was before. Right where the attack was. And that was it. Now we surrendered. Hoping for mercy. We opened the gates and they came in. But no mercy. They were staying for 3 months in the city and in the nearby villages, killing hundreds of our people, bringing diseases in that killed hundreds more. And Rothenburg was plundered, empty, nothing left of value. But they didn't burn it last, because there was a deal. We paid a high ransom, and they took it and went, and Rothenburg still stood. But the war continued, another terrible 17 years. And now something positive turned into negative. It were the trade routes. In peace times, they were just positive. They brought goods and people and money and traffic of all good stuff. But in the war, they brought troops, bandits, marauders. Quartering and plundering was endless. When one went out, almost the next came in. Because sooner or later, everybody was coming along in this intersection. And after half of the war was over, people had forgotten why it once had started. There were no more enemy or allies, but just bandits, trying to plunder and steal as much as they could. And they did. Rothenburg suffered like crazy. And when this war was finally over, this was a poor, forgotten place. We had lost more than half of our people within the city walls, and 70% out in the villages. And for a long time, we could not recover from this. For the next 250 years, nothing happened. People had no money to modernize their city. And no motivation. And there was no need to. So many houses were standing empty. So nothing happened here. And that's the only reason why Rothenburg is so well preserved. It was preserved by poverty. And the wealth of today bases on poverty of yesterday. We just had to wait long enough until tourism started. It took forever. And we didn't know it's coming. But then finally, 1880, 1890, it was the romantic era of European art. There were some famous painters and poets showing up here. And they loved this place. They talked about it to newspapers and magazines. Things were published, and soon after the first visitors arrived. And since a few decades, Rothenburg is world famous and rich again, like it was long ago. Sure, in between, there was a long break, when nothing happened at all. But here we are again, back on the map, with your support. Good to see you. Now, there's a last story about recent history, about times of World War II. And I guess most of you don't know that Rothenburg was bombed by the US Army in March 40. It was destroyed by 40% within the old walls. It happened for a special reason. A few weeks earlier, Nuremberg was bombed and mostly destroyed. It's a big city 50 miles south. And there was a German general who left battered Nuremberg. escaping into Rothenburg with all his Nazi soldiers who survived it there, giving order to hold this city to the last man. Not a good idea. The front line of the American army was really close by, and they found out what's going on. That all these troops were in here and what kind of order was given. And then it happened. On the 31st of March, 1945, there were 16 military aircrafts, so-called Marauders, flying above Rothenburg, dropping these bombs down, which destroyed eastern and northern part of the old city. Thank God it was a foggy day. The pilots up there in the sky, they could not really identify their target, so they didn't hit the city center. Like where we went around on the tour tonight, for instance. There was no damage. But northeastern section looked horrible. And the next plan was to destroy the rest of Rothenburg by artillery. General Devers of the American army was preparing that. And there wasn't much to prepare. He was close by and almost ready to go. And that would have been it. But then he got a call. On the other end of the line was John J. McClure. He was Deputy Secretary of War. And he knew about the beauty of Rome. He knew it's a medieval city. And he kind of liked it. But he never had been here before. You know who was here instead? His mom.
Oh.
Twice before World War II, she came to visit Rothenburg. And she loved it. And she took a painting showing the walls and fortifications back home to New York. It was on the walls of his parents' home when little John Jay grew up. And he was so fascinated to see the painting and listen to the stories his mother told him. He never forgot all this for his whole life. And then much later, as an adult, he was in this high position. And when he heard about the news that Rothenburg should be totally destroyed by artillery, he called his general and he said, "Listen, Devers will not destroy Rothenburg if they surrender. It's a medieval city. Let's give them an option." And so it happened. Because he got involved in the right moment, we got this kind of choice. And one of the best things was, when this news was coming in about this option, the German general was not in town. Perfect timing. He had forbidden any negotiations, like Hitler had forbidden it to all of his generals, even at the end of the war. But as this guy had left Rothenburg for a few days, he had installed a substitute commander, who was Major Thomas, a guy from nearby, not far. And he was a brave man. Because you know what he did? He walked down in the valley with a translator. He couldn't speak any English. And down there was a jeep of the American army with a white flag on top. And a few people and a translator of them waiting for a reaction. Or no. And none would have meant over. But this Major Thomas, he walked down and he said, "It's your city. I hand it over. I'll be gone in the morning. With all my men, I guarantee." And it really happened. The German troops went out of town. The American army occupied it the next day. 5 weeks later, on the 8th of May, the war was over in Europe and we still had our city. We lost a part of it. But not the heart of it. Because of this too. An American and a German, they both saved Rothenburg from total destruction. Then the war was over. But we still had a problem. There was no money to reconstruct the destroyed part of the city. We lost that war. This was a bankrupt country. But people here had a good idea. And you know, that's what you should hear. and you don't have any money. A good idea. By the way, that's how I became a night watchman. This idea was asking the whole world for help. There was an article written by our tourist officials. It was sent to every bigger newspaper worldwide. In this article we said, please, you people out there who are friends of Rothenburg, Germany, the only thing we need right now is money. And we said, please help us some money. And if you do, and it's a certain amount, we'll put your name on our wall. We offered that one could buy a meter or several meters of our wall, symbolic, and have his name there. That's what you see when you walk on the ramparts. There are hundreds of names from all over the world. First the name of the person in the city or country, and then how many meters one walked. If you were wondering what that 1 all the time means, well, 1 meter. It started with 80 marks in the mid-50s. Now it's like 1,300 years. So we still do it. Selling wall. And really, you shouldn't not miss getting there. It's so special. And not to forget, John J. McCloy came to Rothenburg after the war in 1949. He was on the balcony of the town hall with all the local celebrities around him. And the square was packed with hundreds of citizens giving applause for what he did. And he became the first honorable citizen of Rothenburg after World War II. And nothing happened to that German major. Nobody went behind him for anything, for treason or whatever. So everything turned out right, and nobody suffered. But Rothenburg survived because these two men did this unusual thing. Sometimes single people can do that. Influence history. Just do it when it's time to do it. This was the Night Watchman tour. The last thing you should do before you leave was to pay. It was €9 for adults, 4 for students, no charge for kids.